Hello, awesome people! I hope you're having a great day today. Today we're taking a look at The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. It was published in 1912. I read it while I was away for a trip to San Diego. This collection I'll link you to below if you want to read it in cover. It's also 1912, so it's past its copyright date, which is 1927. So I'll also go ahead and link you to the free version, which I'm sure I'll be able to find online. It was heavily read at the time. In 1912, it was beloved. It's listed as a horror and a fantasy. It's set in the far future, except for the first chapter. And then it is, although I think it's probably more of a fantasy pure with a science fiction feel as a secondary genre rather than horror. I didn't feel it as I went back and read it. And so this collection is about 303 pages long. I started it while flying to San Diego for vacation. I had 2 hours. I was only able to knock out the first two chapters, which is 23 pages long. And I was like, well, that's pretty slow. And then I started reading the next section. I had a 4-hour flight to San Diego proper for my second stop in Chicago. And then I knocked out another 50 pages. I got to page 75, and then I was like, and that was it in 4 hours. I was like, that's pretty slow. So I was like, that's pretty slow. I was expecting, typically an oversized collection like this will typically take me about 2 minutes a page for me to knock out, plus sometimes a little bit longer for the short stories. So I figured 25 pages would be roughly an hour for me to knock out, and that was what I was scheduling it. And if that had happened, then I could have knocked it out in 12 hours, right? Or 6 days instead of 2 hours a day and so forth. But by the end of the day, in 6 hours, I figured I was probably going to knock out half of this page, and I'd only knocked out half of that. At 75 pages, it was twice as slow. Sometimes slower, older works that just take a while for you to read will sometimes take a lot longer for me to read. So for example, I read, but typically those are 3 minutes a page. For example, recently I went back and read an August Derleth short story that was published in the 40s. And it was 30 pages exactly. It took me about an hour and a half to do, so that was 3 minutes a page, right? And that's pretty slow, but 4 minutes a page, that was much slower for your folks. So this was a much deeper read. It took me a long time for me to knock out. And so it took me more than a week for me to knock it out last night for the first time. I bought this book more than 10 years ago when I was doing a deep dive into horror, especially pulp era horror, since that's what this is, labeled as. But it's actually probably more science fiction. It's in the dying Earth genre, since it's set, except for the first chapter, it's set millions of years into the future after the sun has mostly died, and only handfuls of pockets of magma and heat and so forth from the earth are keeping people safe, and so forth. So that's what's happening, except for the first chapter for folks. So again, it's fun. This thing has been published a few times here and there. For example, it was republished in the adult Ballantine Adult Fantasies in the 60s and 70s. It's a 2-volume collection that was edited by Lynn Carter. As a reminder, I believe that series, it's the first adult fantasy series, puts fantasy on a map in a major way, and I credit Lynn Carter and another who edited that as one of the best editors of all time for that reason, one of the most influential in fantasy. So if you like fantasy, go, and then you like reading some of these older people that are heavyweights in their genre and so forth, So I typically do my review spoiler free, except for the first few chapters of a novel, in order to get you caught up with what's happening and sort of start out and so forth. I enjoy reading the back of this novel, for example, but actually everything that is happening that you find out is actually in the first 3.5 chapters. It's pretty fast, and then the rest of it is the section and so forth. So let's get started with that. First few chapters that get you started. In the first chapter, it's 13 pages long. He meets the love of his life. This is, by the way, set in the 17th century of the first chapter, and throughout it he will use words that he believes were used commonly in 17th century works for folks out there. So that's kind of cool. But that's one of the reasons why I think it's probably slower for me to read, because it's written differently. I just recently knocked out a collection of 10 pages, 10 short stories by him, and they were very fast to read, even though they were double-sized. So I think it's probably one of the reasons why it's just a slower read. So that's something you want from your collection, and it's fine. It'll probably take you about 24 hours, 25 hours for you to knock it out. for you folks. But in the first chapter, he meets the love of his wife. She dies in childbirth at a young age, and then he mourns her loss. And that's the end of the first chapter. Second chapter, he gets a vision of the far future, millions and millions of years in the future, when the sun has mostly been dying out, and so forth. He'll be younger. He'll start out at 17 for folks. He'll be in this high redoubt that is the last bastion of hope of humanity. It's where the last few millions of people are all living. And folks, we'll find out more about that area in that second chapter, and what it's like, and who his friends are, and his new adopted father is, and such. And then he will, in the third chapter, in the first beginning of the third chapter, we find out one of the reasons that he's well liked is because he has psychic powers called night listening. He can hear the ether, versus very well at night, and so forth. And so he's pretty good at it. And he's the only one of his generation that has the night listening ability. That's one of the reasons why he's liked. And he starts communicating psychically with a woman in a forgotten, lesser redoubt that was forgotten, and it was lesser. They founded another one, and so forth, millions and millions of years ago. And their power from the earth that they got that ran their things ran out and became more and more intermittent, and so she is a forgotten. They were forgotten about by that biomaker because they lost their communication network, and so forth. And so she is a psychic like he is. So they start to communicate. They put him back on the map in a major way, and then they fall in love. And he believes that she is the reincarnation of his love from the 17th century. So that's where that comes from, and so he will. In the beginning of the third chapter, the beginning of the fourth chapter, rather, they will be attacked, and then she will disappear. And so he'll leave the redoubt and enter the nasty Nightlands, which is where the title of this comes from. And then the next part of it will be an Odyssey, and it feels very much like the Odyssey to that too. First few chapters of setup, and then a long version, and then it will end earlier than you think it will, and then you'll have stuff at the end. So that'll also be happening here. I think it's very influenced by the Odyssey. Only this time it's fantasy instead of myths, although there's probably looks like myths today. I'm sorry, like fantasy today rather, and it has a science fiction field. For example, his weapons aren't swords or knives like fantasy. It's called the discos, and they are weapons that launches fire, kind of like a ray pistol or a wand of fire would be, right? So there we go. So there you are. That's the classic, the Nightland for you folks. Again, I'll link it to you. Now, I just want to note that there is a place in here where he flogs his significant other. And so if that's a red flag for you and you don't want to read it for that reason, I have no issues with that. I think that it was. I'm glad that I read it, but it was rougher than I thought it'd be, specifically because it was written like a 17th century novel rather than one that's 100 years old, and then so forth. So there you go. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read The Nightland? If so, what do you think about it? I'm probably just going to be giving it probably like an 8 out of 10 for folks because of how difficult it was to read and how much stuff happens in it and so forth. So I'll be giving it an 8 out of 10. But if you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. As a reminder, this channel's name is The Worst Thing About New Books, which is a quote by a French philosopher, Jacques Joubert, who said that the worst thing about new books was that they kept us from reading the old ones. And so this novel that's published more than 100 years ago is definitely an older work that we oftentimes forgotten about, but it's heavily influential on us. And then, as a reminder, I want to thank you so much if you enjoyed this for watching the videos, and why not hit the subscribe button and so forth too. So thanks again for taking some time out of your day. I really do appreciate it.